Okay, to our interview. He has a long and illustrious career. You know who he is. He is the creator and star of Survivorman. Survivorman. He is Les motherfucking Stroud. Thank you so much for being on Backpacker Radio today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
So let's start with the requisite background question. We want to know, obviously, where you got into the outdoors. Where did that interest stem from? What age, etc.
Oh boy, I was a late bloomer. I was a real late bloomer. My interest, because of the era I grew up in and the area that I grew up in, there was no outdoors. There was no outdoors availability. About all that existed might have been the Boy Scouts, maybe, and they would meet and play floor hockey in the local church basement. So there really wasn't anything. There wasn't even really outers clubs at schools. So to be into the outdoors where I grew up in the West End suburbs of Toronto, Ontario, in Canada, uh, you just kept it hidden. You just didn't even. It never came out. I mean, to me, if the public school, grade 7 or something, if we did a trip to look at insects in the local field by the train yard, that was an outing. That was a big outing sort of thing. So my background for the love of outdoors came from television. Ironically enough, it came from TV, but that's where I could get it. That's where I could watch National Geographic specials on the rare occasion. That's where I could watch Jacques Cousteau specials once every 6 months. That's where I could watch an old show called Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. And those shows shaped my passion for the outdoors, with one added bonus. And that was that my grandmother's house was up in the woods of Northern Ontario, Canada. And then, so after she passed away, my family would go up there. My mom, my dad, myself, and my sister would go up there, and our relatives were up there. And that was the forest. So there I finally, even, I suppose at 8, 9, 10 years of age, had the chance to go and play in the back 40, if you will, out behind the cottage, which is just a little cabin in the woods kind of thing. And that's where I got the personal connection, and nothing big, just watching ants, and this is really cliche, but actually making little shelters, sort of thing. So I was definitely setting my own stage there. So that's it for background. Late bloomer. It all kicked in for me in my 20s, not my teenage years.
So I don't want to fast forward too far too quickly, but you mentioned obviously that TV inspired you to get into the outdoors. Was that part of the onus for creating Survivorman, to pay that forward to future, bushcrafters?
In a way, yeah, sure. Was I conscious of the fact that there was a paying it forward and going on there? I don't. I think I'd be lying if I said I wasn't conscious of that. It occurred to me that I was living out my dream. My two heroes were Jacques Cousteau and Tarzan. We got this nature filmmaker and this dude in the jungle. And if you think about it, what is Survivorman? Right? It's the in my fantasy filled mind, it's the combination of Jacques Cousteau and Tarzan. That's me playing. It's me pretending and being an adventurer and all of that. So it definitely, those early experiences on television. So later, and that's why I've never been against technology and nature. That's why I've never been one to say, let's blow up your TV, in the words of John Prine, because in fact, if it wasn't for television, there was the cottage on the weekend eventually, but really those things that I learned and saw, what Jacques Cousteau did, that really inspired me. And so, yeah. And again, also not to jump too far forward, but along the way was another fellow filmmaker called Bill Mason, who made canoeing films. Now, not like Warren Miller. Warren Miller was great, but Warren Miller was a little inaccessible. Warren Miller did big ass ski films. I didn't ski, right? So Warren Miller, he was a little unreachable in what he did, but he was great. I'm kind of the only guy doing that, except for Bill Mason in Canada and all of his water walker film and all of his canoeing instructional films. Again, I didn't see him till later, but I saw him before I became a filmmaker. So he definitely inspired me that way for sure. And I'll just throw in there, by the way, that because you didn't ask this, but I didn't fill it in either, was that my parents were no good at this at all. There was no mentorship, no guidance, no encouragement whatsoever from my family to be into the outdoors. That was like just my internal passion.
You mentioned that you don't have an issue with technology in the outdoors. Does that even extend as far as people that are reliant on their cell phone for navigation?
Good question. And you're asking a guy who is a search and rescue instructor, technician. In fact, I'm training a tangent. I'm training because I'm about to go and actually finally officially get my level one search and rescue fitness, which is 12 miles uphill with 40 pounds on your back and an overnight in the snow. So I'm like, ah, so I got to train for that and to be ready for it. But the reason why I answered it that way is because within search and rescue, we get calls all the time. And funnily enough, sometimes, I mean, it's kind of a little bit almost potentially morbid, but there's a bit of an excitement to getting a call as a search and rescue volunteer. It's like, I got to go, and you go. By the same token, we get a lot of calls that are just go pick them up because they ran into mud on the dirt road and they got drunk when they were doing a back roads driving trip, but their cell phones work. So we're going there. So it doesn't feel as cool, if you will, to go and rescue a couple of drunks who went off on a mountain road versus somebody who was doing an extensive hiking trip and got into trouble. Um, but I still haven't answered your question, perhaps because I don't know. Is there a purist strain in me that yearns for no technology and the ability of people to read a compass and read a map and understand the trails and understand the terrain? Absolutely. But I think it would be cruel if I just said, well, don't use what could keep you alive. I think you can still experience an amazing trek in nature and know that you have backup that is highly technological. I mean, if I do an extensive trip to this day, my sat phone goes with me, and I'm Survivorman. So,
Right.
so I don't see there's any shame at all in the purists of us to also embrace the technology that makes, as long as it makes the trek safer.
Chance, I don't want to dominate the question, so I'll let you take the next one.
Oh, I was gonna say because it sounds like you have like a pretty good appreciation for the videos that you were watching and everything like that. And I was seeing that you also had a background in music, so another type of the arts. How did that transition into the outdoors for you, from music to what you're doing now?
It's a good question, because I always connected music and my music with nature. So I was an early fan of Neil Young, let's say. And when Neil Young would sing about his ranch or something, it always excited me. So I was definitely an early fan or John Denver, for example. John Denver was a huge nature lover, and his music just wrong word, but bled nature in all of the lyrics. And I was always a big fan of that. I was always influenced by that. So my music was not always necessarily lyrically about nature, but the feel in my acoustic stuff, my roots rock and my acoustic stuff, the feel was very, that whole sort of roots rock, Neil Young, John Denver kind of approach. Now, by the way, anybody who listens to this and says, John Denver, ooh, yuck, gross, cliche, old has, I mean, of course, he's passed away. Well, they're an idiot, because in fact of the matter is the man was a great outdoor adventurer. He loved the mountains, and he wrote incredible music about connecting to nature like no one else. So his stuff is really powerful that way. And in fact, I've covered some of his stuff on one of my albums. But for me, yeah, so musically speaking, nowadays it's very pointedly, a lot of my stuff is about nature. Did I do that on purpose? Yeah. Was it contrived? I don't think so, because the lyrics still came from my heart and everything came from my experiences to write the lyrics that I do. Um, so the latest album is called Mother Earth, and that's all about connecting to nature. So I might not be writing about paddling a canoe, but I definitely will be writing about connecting to nature in some fashion or another. So I think one informs the other in a very reciprocal kind of in a very reciprocal kind of way.
Cool.
I'm curious, from a technical standpoint, how much of your musical background informed what you did with Survivorman? Like, did you, from a lot of the production elements, did that help you create your career as a documentarian?
It did, in the aspect of trying to be a little bit of a what's the word I'm looking for? Sorry, it's escaping me here. You got me later in the day here. My brain's not on fire as much. If you got me at 10 a.m., then the coffee's kicking in. Uh,
Noted.
Perfectionist. That's the word I'm looking for. Hard word. It did in that respect, because when you record in a recording studio, if you're working with really talented people, you're hopefully forced into perfectionism to do really good work, to do really beautiful work as a musician. And I've worked with every musician I've ever worked with is way better than me. I'm just the guy who gets it going and puts it together. I'm the guy with the drive. So that perfectionism does spill over into me. And then, so when I'm out filming, uh, I'm probably a better filmmaker than I'm a musician. I don't know, or back and forth. I'm not sure. But in any event, the perfectionism needs to be there. By the way, this is a strange tangent, but that's something missing today in thousands of YouTube videos, for example, is this perfectionism. We're losing that really quickly. The perfectionism of really crafting your art. And I always refer to this one documentary video called It Might Get Loud, which is about the guitarists and Jimmy Page and The Edge and Jack White. And at one point, Jimmy Page makes a point of saying you still need craft. And I think a lot of times people today, with the way we're doing things on YouTube, they don't understand craft. And I'll bring it home to what you asked me is that so there's craft in creating really good music if you're paying attention to the people who are good at it. And there's craft in filmmaking. And so you do need to learn how to do things properly and set things up well and deal with the technology of your cameras. All of that said, you still need to write a good song. You still need to tell a good story. So sometimes a great song is better heard with an acoustic guitar and a voice than it is with all the producers and the LA session cats in the world. And sometimes a really great story is told well on film, in spite of not having all of the greatest camera people in the world to film you. So there's a blend there, but yeah, I mean, short answer is I think they inform each other in the professionalism of it all, for sure.
Before we jump into the trips that you've taken, I was watching Survivorman last week, and I was trying to count, like, talking about the craft and all of that. I was trying to count the amount of cameras you had with you, and I think I got to about 3 or 4 that I was noticing. How many cameras are you taking out with you, and do you know how much it weighs just for the documentary stuff?
I do, and good luck with that. Doing that count. First of all, with a smirk of pride, I would say that that there's my craft coming through. There's me. It's quite funny how often someone who might have criticized me at first will say later, they say, I went out and I tried to do what you do, and I had one camera. It was exhausting. And I'm like, yeah, I know. But that exhaustion you don't care about when you're really into doing what you're doing. I would suggest that any given Survivorman had 3 to 5 cameras. This is before GoPros. So these are cameras that, they all weigh a half to 2 pounds. And batteries. And, like now you have long lasting batteries. Back then, your battery might last 8 hours, but I'm there for a whole week without recharge.
You had the tripods
right?
too.
And the tripods and other various versions of tripods. I certainly should have patented the selfie stick idea. Missed out on that one. Because, I mean, if you go back, that's, now that since we're having that discussion about, I love talking about filmmaking, so don't get me down this road too far. It's hard to pull me back. But, I love the craft of filmmaking. I love the craft of what I do as an outdoor adventure filmmaker. And I think that's what's missing a lot of times when people do stuff. They miss understanding and knowing the craft. And there are things that I did on Survivorman purely because I had to, out of necessity, because I was alone, that to this day, I see people try to emulate and they have crews with them. And it doesn't work the same. When some joker on one of these other, copycat shows tries to like hold the camera lens like this and then talk to you as if they're like by themselves. And it's like, dude, you're holding on to a Sony Betacam that's on the shoulder of your camera person. And it's, it's just looks stupid now. So in the camera work, to get back to your question, the thing about having 3 to 5 cameras was it just saved me having to just reset up. It meant I didn't have to fake doing something again. Like, I guess I better spark the fire again. Or I better put it out and do it again in 3 different angles. Just prop up these cameras. They weighed, I think the heaviest I was out there was about 55 pounds. That's a lot of weight when you're not eating, you're not staying in a tent, you're not in a sleeping bag, you're scrambling through the bush and you're trying to film yourself. It's a lot of weight. I would lose a lot of weight in those first couple of seasons. Then they started getting lighter, and GoPro. I used the GoPro the second it was invented, so that definitely saved my butt that way.
So you mentioned copycats. I'm curious, does it bother you to be mentioned in the same breath as like a Bear Grylls?
What do you think?
I mean, I have my guesses, but I'd like to.
If the story, I've told the story many, many times, and so in some ways, I want to tease it and say for your listeners, they should just kind of check out one of the many interviews I might have done. But in short, the bottom line is, they asked me to cheat. I said no. They invented Bear Grylls.
Interesting.
And I mean that with all the seriousness I can muster here. The Survivorman was kicking it for 4 years with nobody else doing anything of what I did ever. And because I couldn't produce 26 episodes a season, because I was actually doing it, they had to come up with another way. And they tried so hard to get me to cheat. And I said no. So they just said, okay, well, screw him. And then they ripped me off. Now, after that, everybody else that's come along, look at it this way. Has anybody out there ever done what I did? Not a chance. No, you can name a name and I'll tell you how they did not do what I've done. Most of them, the majority of them were semi-scripted and faked anyway. Dual survival, man, woman, wild, man versus wild, naked and afraid, all scripted, all producers doing this and that. You can't go over there. We need to film this scene here, all of that. The one exception of the rule is Alone. They're actually going through it. They're going through hell. Some of them are really good people, but in the 11th hour, the ball gets dropped because then it all goes to LA and producers and editors in Los Angeles make it whatever they want it to be. And they grab sound bites and they grab things. I know a guy who was on that show who caught 5 fish and they didn't even put it on the show. He caught 5 fish with a net he made himself. That would have been my highlight reel. They didn't even put it on. Why not? Because it means it looks like he wasn't really suffering very much. They needed him to suffer, right?
What about Michael Scott?
Now, Michael Scott kicked it.
That's got to be the biggest compliment of all time, right?
That was the moment I literally saw that episode of The Office. Well, first of all, I'll give you a backstory. They called me and they asked if I wanted to be on it, and if they asked if they could use footage from Survivorman, which I was like, yeah. And then the writer's strike hit, and they called back and said, we're still putting the show on, but we can't change anything now. So we have to go with what we had before we actually spoke to you the first time. It's the only one of 2 episodes that Steve Carell ever wrote, was Survivorman and another one. And he wrote that one himself. And it aired when that show was in the peak of its peak. The biggest comedy show ever in the world at that point, maybe still to this day. And I was at home and I watched it as it aired for the first time. And that was the moment where I thought, I think I maybe have done something here. I think I might have actually come somewhere in my life. I was incredibly proud. And pretty giddy by the whole thing. Yeah. The King of the Hill did the same thing. And you look at that and you go, this is really surreal. If South Park ever did it, I would just fall off my chair. They never did, unfortunately.
So you mentioned King of the Hill. Did you get a chance to talk to Mike Judge?
No, they just did it. I just saw it one day, and there it was. I think the character is Dale. He tries to be me for the episode. So I mean, that whole story about, and even we didn't, the other thing I want to say about the copycat shows, and that was the other place where they went, is somewhere I will never go. And anybody who actually does survival, by the way, survival instructors now, it's a badge of honor to say no to those shows when they get the call. Something like, hey, you want to be on this show? You're a survival instructor. It's a badge of honor now amongst most of us to say no. And what I was going to say was, they became about competition. Survival is not about competition, and it never will be. You don't go out into a survival situation and compete with anybody. You help each other survive. That's what it's about. And so I've been asked, I got asked 7 times to go on First Man Out with Ed Stafford. It's like, no, shove it. No, not a chance. That's a joke. I have no intention of going out there and seeing who can run the fastest and the farthest. That's got nothing to do with survival. Why don't you just go on American Ninja Warrior and really put yourself to a test? Because this is just a joke. And you're scripting it to make it all work. So no.
Where's the place that you'll never go? You started a sentence and you said the place that I'll never go, that all survivors know you'll never go.
in a survival competition
Oh, okay.
to do survival as a competition.
I thought it was like a
That's what I would do.
place. I was
I
like,
would
"Where
never.
should we go?" Cool.
Oh no.
So, could you talk about reality TV in general? And are you frustrated? Do you feel like you're being dragged down by the category? Because obviously, what you did was very authentic, and like for anybody that knows anything about reality TV, it's not real. Like it's so overproduced. They stage different scenarios, and it sounds like you were not willing to do that, and thus the copycats were invented. So, like, are you frustrated by reality TV in general? And like, do you hate being lumped into that conversation?
No. Yes. Uh, I'm a documentary filmmaker. That's what I do. I make documentary films. Unfortunately for me, I was making them, and my show became a hit just as the genre of reality TV was beginning to take off. So the assumption was made I was reality TV because I'm really doing it. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I went out to document the concepts of wilderness survival and adventure. End of story. Just like my new series, Wild Harvest, is a documentary series on local foraging. Um, and my Survivorman Bigfoot was a documentary series on the phenomenon. So no, I'm yes, I am frustrated if I get lumped in, and frankly, I don't care who's interviewing me. If I was sitting beside Jimmy Fallon and he said, "Hit reality TV producer Les Stroud," I would call him on it on the show. I'd say, "I don't make reality TV, Jimmy. I'm a documentary film producer. Get it straight." So I call people on it. But am I frustrated by it? If I am, I'm frustrated by it because it decreases my faith in humanity. If you want to go that deep, when that there's so many of the masses that enjoy being fed so much pablum. I just and then they're being told pablum is steak and they believe it. I just yeah. So is my disdain for reality TV evident enough? I'm not denying it. If you like it for entertainment, if you think it's entertaining, if you think it's funny, I'm all for that. And the other competition shows, like the cooking competitions and the Ninja Warriors, I'm all for that. But that pack that portrays, regular people who happen to be quirky because they looked, after a while, it was who is the quirkiest person we can get on our show about extermination or something, and then passes it all off as real. Uh, so it bothers me to no end that people can be led astray. As I said, as long as they are aware of what they're watching, on it, go for it, man. You can watch Honey Boo Boo till the cows come home. And but when they think it's real, that's just disheartening. You know, so a friend of mine, David Halliday, is an incredible survival instructor, and he's not on any of these survival shows. And he was a consultant for me, but then he was a consultant for Man vs. Wild, and he hated it because the producers kept saying, "Well, we have to produce this in a way that works for that really feeds it to people." And he kept saying feeds it to people. It was like feeding them pablum, and he would say, why don't we try to raise them up instead? Why don't we give them something to think about? Why don't we speak to them like they're mature and intelligent? Not like but the producers would have nothing of it. And I agree with David. So reality TV is man, we could go on. I could do a whole podcast on reality TV because I was there when it started. I was part of it. I got swallowed into it, unfortunately, when I shouldn't have been. And I watched it happen. And it's a very bizarre phenomenon of the last 15 years or so. And but in a short answer is I hate it. I hate's a strong word. I'm saddened by it.
Yeah.
I wish people would watch something more intelligent and be edified. But boring, though I may be. There you go.
Well, here's a better segue, something more intelligent. We'll use a different segue for this one. The year-long honeymoon project.
Mm.
Could you tell us about that, please?
Yeah. So, well, that was the result of me as an outdoor guide, guiding for years, dog sledding trips, skiing trips, cross-country skiing trips. I suck at downhill. I can do it, but I suck. Whitewater canoeing, kayaking. I think I mentioned that. Hiking. So I was doing all of this guiding and, of course, survival instruction and wilderness first aid and on and on. And what happens when you do that as a guide? If you're a young guy doing this, and even though I was a late bloomer, I was still young compared to now. And you get to the end of July, maybe, or August, I should say, and maybe you slip a little bit into September with some kids groups and stuff like that. And then somewhere around mid-September, you're like, oh man, I have to go home. I have to go back to like the city. I have to go back to the urban environment. You're well, the lodge is closing up. The outdoor center's closing. The outdoor adventure companies shuts down. It's their shoulder season, and you just after a while, like, well, can't I just stay? And then one time, and at this point, I was married. Was I married? No, I wasn't actually married at that point. But the woman that I was seeing, and just said, why don't we just stay for a whole year? And that's where it's all started, because I said to myself, you know what? This would make a really cool documentary film. And I know how to film this stuff because back in my musical days, when I was working on rock videos with everybody from Rush to Corey Hart, I was learning about editing techniques. I was learning camera stuff, and I stored that, right? Even though I went on to be a guide. So I thought, let's put the two together. I bet you I can get a small enough camera and see if I can make this work in a rechargeable car battery with a solar panel. Sure enough, I did. And I emulated the Bill Mason, and I brought out my inner Jacques Cousteau while I was expressing my inner Tarzan by living in the woods for a year. All came together at that moment. And that gave me my calling card of being able to say, a couple of years later, to a network somewhere, I have this idea called Survivorman. Oh, and I have done an award-winning film. Here, take a look at this. Won some small regional awards. But still, it was something I produced so they could look at it and go, well, the guy knows how to film. And this is pretty cool. Sure, let's do it. So that's how that came to be. And the idea of doing it all rough and rugged and like 500 years ago was because I was a survival instructor. I really wanted to put some stuff to the test. I mean, in the end, we had to compromise no matter what, through just ignorance of not knowing really what was possibly going to happen, and we ended up with some. Most of the compromises came about because we got Giardia, B, my father died, C, my dog died, and D, my wife had at the time had a miscarriage. So
Wow.
in the bush, into a bucket. So I mean, all those things sent us into a different way where we ended up using a wood stove and we used an axe and a saw. But other than that. So that's where that came. It's called Snowshoes in Solitude is the name of the film. I'm very proud of it, actually.
Where could someone find that?
Oh, actually right now, I'm putting everything I've ever done on YouTube. So
Hmm.
it's all on my YouTube channel, Survivorman - Les Stroud. Everything's there. Snowshoes in Solitude's there. The first Survivorman pilots are there. Everything I've ever done is going up weekly there, and I'm having a blast doing it.
So you own all the rights to all of your content?
So again, when you talk to me about this kind of stuff, you're really talking to an outlier, and I'm not flattering myself. I just mean that I just didn't do things the normal way. I own everything I've ever done.
Wow. How did you manage that? Is it just because you were ahead of the reality TV curve and they hadn't learned how to take advantage of people? Or is it just you were so staunch about being the content owner and it was like, take it or leave it?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
I was staunch, but it was the right time to be staunch.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, those
absolutely.
stories are rare because, like, I know South Park, for instance, they own all the digital rights to South Park because that was before Comedy Central had realized the value of the digital rights, and I think they got it at some insane rate. So yeah, that it pays to be early for sure.
Well, look at it now. I mean, Discovery Plus is coming to me now, and they're offering me less money I can make on YouTube.
Hmm.
So I'm like, why? Why? For the prestige of being on your network? Yeah, well, come, show me on the line what the prestige is worth, because that's not worth that.
Yeah.
I'm happy giving my stuff away for free to people. I'm not in a position where I need to go hunt down a job. So yeah, it is the television world and the online viewing experience. I mean, you guys know this. We're not even done changing yet, but it's massively changing and has been. About a dozen years ago, I said to my staff, I said, you watch. One day, I'll be able to flip the finger to the networks and do what I want, and it'll go online, and I'll still be able to make a living. And I believe that day is here. I think it's just here, just now. Not, it wasn't here 2 years ago. It was barely here a year. I think it's here now. I think it's just kind of landed. I'm proving it to myself. I've tried 2 other times to do it. Didn't work. Didn't work. The environment wasn't ready for it. But now it works. And so the networks and all that, they've got to, and at the same time they're losing money. So now they're asking you to do more and take less money. And it's, fine for, a young person trying to get into it. They can rip them off, but they're not going to be able to to do that with me. So back in the day, I just always understood the most powerful word in Hollywood. Quote, I'm doing air quotes here. No, that's the most powerful word. It always will be. Well, we want you to do this. No, no, thanks. Well, what if we give you this? No, no. All right, how about if we give you this? Okay, let's talk. It's been, I've always been like that, and I've always been willing to walk away. I no need to sell my soul.
Yeah. So I got to imagine that everybody listening to this is familiar with Survivorman, and also just like based on your previous answers, they'd be able to piece it together. But just in case there's one person out there that isn't familiar with the show, could you give an introduction to it and your vision of what it is?
No, I should leave that for you to do in the intro, but okay. So what I would say, and I say with pride and a little bit lacking in humility here, and I don't mean to. I don't do it with hubris, but the bottom line is that I'll say it this way: without Survivorman, you don't have Naked and Afraid. You don't have Alone. You don't have Man versus Wild. You don't have the plethora of bushcrafters who are online right now making hundreds of thousands of dollars. You don't have any of that. Now, why am I making such a grand, bombastic statement? Well, we'll go back to history. Before I put Survivorman on television, none of it existed. None of it. And I put, and I had to fight to get it on. And when I tried to get it on, quote unquote, from network executives, less. No one's ever going to want to watch anybody survive on television. That's a quote. And I said in my brain, no, you're wrong. You're wrong. I know this is a good idea. And I pushed and pushed and I got it on. And then 4 years later, they basically said, we're just going to take this concept and make Man versus Wild. And dump millions of dollars into promoting that. And so the watershed came from that. So I had a good solid 3 years to almost 4 years where that was it. I was the only guy doing that. Now, people want to bring up Ray Mears and they want to bring up Bush Tucker Man, and I love them both. These guys are the real deal. But they weren't doing the get out there and survive and film yourself thing. Not at all. They were teaching some skills, and they were being filmed teaching some skills, which I had done before and lots of other people had done before, but nobody done anything like Survivorman. Not even Mark Burnett's Survivor thing, because that was about hard bodies doing outward bound, in remote locations. That wasn't survival. Survivorman was the only thing of its kind, and without it, you don't have the rest of the survival TV genre. So I know that's a bombastic claim to make, but I don't make any apologies for making it.
So how far out there are you? Like, you keep saying remote. Is there like a trail that's like 5 miles away, or how far are you making sure you go into where you're going?
So it's yes and no. There have been times where I have been so remote that a wrong step or a bite of a wrong snake, I'm dead. It's over. I'm a dead man. There's no way out of this. Many, many times like that. Then there's been times where I've been in places like that and had a satellite phone. So I could call. How long it would take them to come in and get me, I don't know, but I could call if the phone's working, which it didn't always. Then there were times where I could walk out if I wanted to. But it didn't matter because I chose not to. I'm where I need to be. So in Utah, I could have walked out in Utah. I knew where the road was. In the Cook Islands, for example, I could have theoretically swam out at low tide, maybe, but it would have been dangerous. I'd have to be a real strong swimmer. But I could have maybe dog paddled or tread. I don't know. Still, it was still over my head, but it would be about 10 feet for a long ways. And then I could see. There were times when I could see way off in the distance civilization. There were times in Georgia I could hear trucks downshifting on the highway. Now, it was still many miles away, but I could hear the trucks downshifting. So it's kind of like that. In many ways, I normally kind of answer like, what does it matter? I'm still stranding myself. I'm still staying there. And in a survival scenario that is contrived only to the point of I need to have something a hook to hang this on. I want to hang the show on a hook. What am I hanging it on? Well, I'm hanging it on being out in the middle of Utah and my motorbike breaks down. Okay, that's what I'm hanging it on. Well, I need a motorbike with me, right? I'm in Norway and my car gets stuck in the snow. Okay, what should I have in that car? Well, let's have some supplies. Okay. I'm hanging it on that. So depending on what I was doing so I didn't need to always be helicoptered into the middle of the Amazon jungle. I was quite fine, hiking in for a couple of hours and then just staying there for a week and doing my show. Because in many, I could also answer that and say many people are lost primarily 2 miles from their home. So
So
And I just wanna take a oh, so go ahead, Sean,
no, go
sorry.
ahead.
I just wanna take a step back to when you introduced Survivorman, for people who haven't seen it, like, I feel like we didn't really, like, emphasize how impressive and difficult it is for you to film yourself, because it's not like you're just carrying the one camera and pointing it at yourself and then creating a show from that. Like, the thing that strikes me most about your show is the cinematography that goes into what you're doing, because, like, the task itself seems so incredibly difficult to be able to have to think through, like, staging shots, in addition to all the challenges that you're enduring. I think is what, like, it just makes the show so complex and just adds another dimension that it's hard to not appreciate. That wasn't a question, more so just like
no, no, but I mean, well, and I also didn't truly answer your question the first round. The answer is all I truly want to do with all I truly wanted to do with Survivorman was teach survival skills and connect people to nature. So you have to remember that Survivorman was created based on teaching real skills and connecting people to nature. That's it. And if I'm going to show survival, I thought, well, if I have a crew with me, I kind of blow it right there on several levels. I'm not going to be lonely. We're going to talk, we're going to chat, we're going to kill time. If it's day 3 and I truly haven't eaten and the cameraman goes, hey man, you want this chocolate bar? I'm going to eat it. I'm human. So I had to really strand myself, if you will, without the camera crew, which meant I had to be the camera crew. Now, I already know I'm going home. I already know I'm there to make a film. So I lose on the survival side by knowing those things. So how do I gain it back and make it more realistic survival? Well, I don't have equipment. I don't have the food. I don't have all these different things depending on the scenario. And then I started to realize that, the filming of myself is such a disadvantage that in many ways it kind of, in my brain anyway, it counteracted the knowledge that I'm not actually surviving. I am going to go home in a week, right? So, but how did it counteract it? Because it was bloody hard. You had to have real passion as a filmmaker to really express the creative cinematography in a way that helps to tell your story beautifully. So often, if I walk through a valley area, I know that if I put a camera over on that hill, it's going to look amazing. But that means it's a 3-hour setup just to go put the camera over there, run around into position, walk through the frame. Now, why would you do all that crap? That's not survival. No, it's not. But if I truly want to tell the true story of where I am, that's the imagery you need to see. And anyway, 50% of my time is filmmaking, 50% of my time is surviving. That's how Survivorman really played out. Now, sometimes when the survival got rough, the filmmaking had to suffer. It's like, oh, I'm in the shit right now. I got to fix this. And I wouldn't even think about running the camera. I need to really, this is trouble. Sometimes survival's like, okay, I got this covered. My shelter's built. I got a fire going. Now the filmmaking starts to flourish. I got a little bit of time on my hands to set up some more of those 3 to 5 cameras we talked about. So the cinematography and the filmmaking side of Survivorman was a point of pride of mine. I do believe that again, with a lot of braggadocio here, I can look back at the work that I did and show you historically where I was doing things because I had to, that nobody else would do because they had a crew. They don't need to set up shots like that. They got people. They can film. There's multiple cameras, and you're not, the host isn't doing any of the camera work. I didn't have that option. So how do I tell this story and do all the camera work at the same time? How do I do that? And so techniques evolved on my part, which meant that my editor, who was a brilliant editor named Barry Farrell, after the first season, he came on board and he was brilliant. And he realized that he could do editing techniques that no one had ever done before because no other editor had to deal with a cameraman who's shooting himself. So all of these creative things grew out of making this series that I never expected. I just thought I was just going to film myself. I didn't realize I'd have to invent, a good 6 or 7 methods of cinematography that nobody else would ever have to do. And case in point, one of the head producers at Discovery Channel pulled me aside one day and he said, I use your series Beyond Survival. as a instructional tool for new producers. So you want to make a series for Discovery Channel? Look at this. He said, I feel that's the best series we've ever done in history. And it only ever aired once, and there's different reasons why it was canceled. And I will tell you if you ask, but the bottom line is I was really in that series. I had all sorts of camera people. It was known like it was a different kind of documentary. But the fact that I'd been trained so well by myself while making Survivorman, it served me well as a filmmaker.
And
It's very impressive.
so when you're going to these places, how do you decide where you're going to go, and how much prep goes in and research goes into preparing to go somewhere? Because I imagine you can't just hop on a plane somewhere and expect to live off the land without knowing anything about the area, right?
Yeah, that was actually part of my point was my pre-research. Unlike these other aforementioned shows where they would go and they were scripting and they brought a book along and it's like, now let's do this one. I would spend a good solid week or longer online and calling and reading about a place I was going to before I got there. And when I got there, I would go and be trained by somebody in that location. Now, why? It's like, well, that's not fair. You're not really surviving if you get dropped. I'm there to make a film about survival. I want to impart knowledge. I've got a freaking clue how to survive in the Australian outback. I need to learn. Now, I'm a quick study on that subject matter because I love it. When I learned from Desert David Halliday in Arizona, he taught me, and he said later, he goes, I always wondered, why didn't you take any notes? He goes, and then I watched you when the show came out, and you repeated everything I ever said to you. And I said, I know, because I love this stuff. I didn't need to take notes, man. You tell me that the strawberry pincushion cherry, the strawberry pincushion cactus says, delicious and does this. I'm soaking that up. I love it. So yes, I researched heavily because my job was to impart real knowledge, not create stunts and be sensational about the survival thing. I mean, back again on that argument, one of the things was they wanted me to ramp up the drama of Survivorman. And I said to the executive producers, I said, so let me get this straight. You got a man alone in the middle of the Amazon jungle, no food, no water, no gear. He's filming himself for a week with jaguars and tapirs and everything all around him. And you don't think that's dramatic enough? Yeah, conversation's over. So, forget where I was going with that, but the bottom line is that there's so much wonderful drama out there and story out there. And so I do remember now where I was going. So to take your question a little bit further is to say also the way I decided was to look at a place and say, is there a story there? Could someone actually be lost there? Is there a survival story to tell in that desert? And if there is, then I would tell it. I don't think I would do a survival story about being lost in Central Park, but I would on the outskirts of Yosemite, because that's possible, or Glacier, certainly Glacier anywhere. So the story had to make sense, and not all deserts are alike. So it was great to do multiple deserts or multiple oceans or multiple forests. They're not all alike, and different seasons even. So was there a story there? It's okay. There's a story there to tell. Now I don't actually know that ecosystem. I need to go learn about it.
So in all these survival settings, the thing that I always anticipate the most is the gross shit that you have to eat. What's the grossest shit that you've ever consumed for that show?
Oh, the sago larva on the which was actually the Beyond Survival series that I did, where I went out and I survived with the indigenous cultures. That's up on my YouTube channel now. That's my favorite film work I've ever done to date. I went out and I learned with the Mentawai in Indonesia, and culturally they gave me this grub to eat alive, and it was like if you took milk and put it in a plastic bag and set it out in the sun for 2 weeks and then came back and ate it, plastic wall. It was disgusting. So there's lots of gross, but the point of the gross stuff that I ate was never to eat gross stuff. It was to say, you think you're going to come out here, all you machismo-headed dudes, and you're going to fashion a spear out of a twig and a bow and arrow out of your shoelaces, and you're going to bring down a deer. That's not what survival is really like. Survival is groveling and hoping you get through the next day. And often it means you got to eat some worms or some snails or some grubs or things like that, because that's all there really is. All these guys I see now, I mean, it cracks me up. I'm going to be on my podcast. I'm going to shameless plug my podcast, Surviving Life with Stroud. I do is obviously got a lot of they're out there now. I get, I'll see the feedback and stuff. I could go out. Why didn't you just make a bow and arrow and take down a deer? And why didn't you just scare the rabbit? It's like, first of all, like the season, the ecosystem, the tools. Does anybody have any real idea how difficult it is to hunt, even with a high-powered rifle? Or how difficult it is to fish, even with good fishing tackle. Oh, I would catch fish every year. Yeah, at your favorite hole, your favorite fishing hole, where you like. But if you're thrust in the middle of some spot you've never been before, you're not just bringing home the bacon, so to speak. It's tough. Survival's tough, and that's what led to saying, you know what? Many times all you got is snails. That's it. You're gonna eat some snails. They're right there.
So then what is your favorite survival food that you've had?
Fish.
Fish?
Fish. Always fish. Yeah. In the Arctic episode, I caught 4 Arctic char,
Ooh.
which is a salmon, and they were all like, I can't show on the screen. They were so big, and that was, by far, that was just that. The irony and a behind the scenes story on that show is that my crew for that show, and my crew is a safety crew in case I'm in real trouble, if they can get to me. And they also go off and film the birds and the bees. So the transitional shots, and that came later when there was better budget. Well, they're about 5 miles away. I had a better week in the Arctic than they did. They were eating crappy, horrible packaged soup in a tent heated with a propane heater that reeked of fumes. I'm out on the land sleeping under the stars eating Arctic char with a roaring fire. So I actually had a better week that week than my crew did. That was my one. Because normally they're off having steak and beer, and I hate them for it. But this time, it was all me.
Did you bring like warm gear for that one? Surely you didn't go on that one.
Warm clothing. I tend to.
Did you
I tend to never.
Did you?
No sleeping bag. No.
Even to the Arctic?
Yeah, no sleeping bag. No. I've never. The whole idea is being the only episode that I ever had a sleeping bag in was the Norway episode where I got lost, where I got stuck in the car in the snow. That's the only time. Every other episode, no. The point is on the other hand, I do like to sometimes show what would be different if you had gear. And so sometimes I have some gear and I show that. Never a sleeping bag though. I just figured I could always make do without a sleeping bag. In wherever I went, sort of thing.
If memory serves, I think it was an island episode. Did you eat turtle on that episode?
Turtle I ate was in Georgia in a swamp.
Okay. How did turtle sounds disgusting to me? How was turtle?
No, I unfortunately it was terrible in that episode, but normally it can be good. And remember, these are last ditch efforts at survival. That was what I was showing was that when you grovel like that and eat a snake. This is a last-ditch survival bit of instruction. It's like, don't go out and start hunting turtles and eating them. But that's not the way it works. So can this stuff taste good? It can, and sometimes it does. Sometimes stuff's delicious, like the Arctic char or the witchetty grubs in Australia are delicious. I mean, some stuff, regardless of what it looks like, just tastes good. Scorpions taste good. So, and that's when I would say it, rather than, again, sensationalize and say, oh, this is really disgusting eating this scorpion. It's like, no, actually it's kind of good.
Do you think you would have kicked ass on Fearfactor?
No.
No?
No, because the only, in most things maybe, but it's this minute that they brought height into it, I'm out.
Interesting. So did you ever schedule your survivor experiences to avoid like cliffs or any sort of exposure?
Not really. No, and I found myself in some precarious situations. Norway, going down the mountain was really dangerous. I almost became hypothermic. It's coming up to icy cliffs. There was another one in the Rocky Mountains. So no, not really. I mean, I just didn't do rock climbing. I mean, I'm not like, I can climb a mountain and I can climb ridgy areas, but if it's really precarious, then I'm turning back. So.
And
everybody's got an Achilles heel. Mine is heights.
What's the biggest mistake you'd say you've made on one of these trips?
Getting cocky.
How has that affected you?
That's how you make a mistake. Well, in Norway, it almost killed me. In the Kalahari Desert, it almost killed me with heat stroke. The complete opposite. Getting cocky is always it. It's the minute you think here's what I would say it if I was doing a keynote. I would say something like, when you use the phrase "I got this," Well, it's one thing to say to some people in a matter of confidence, you know what, everybody? It's okay. I've got this. That's one thing. That's confident. You're thinking it through, and you're just expressing confidence. Okay, I've got this. We can make this work. It's totally different to say, I got this. You do that, you're in trouble. The minute you're cocky about it, the minute you're just pulling that, don't worry about it. I got it. It's all cool. Leave it with me. And in my case, it's like, I'm Survivorman. What could go wrong? Yeah, well, I found out. So that's when things get me in trouble, is whenever I become cocky and I forget myself and I think I'm owning the wilderness. That's when I get into trouble. Norway, going down the mountain, hypothermic, Kalahari, heat stroke. Um, I got chased by a moose in northern Ontario. Again, I was getting cocky there. Chased by elk, got cocky there. I did not get cocky when I was in tiger territory, and I was very careful when I got chased by a jaguar. So, but yeah, that's how I get in trouble, and that's how everybody gets in trouble. You guys, I'm sure, are outdoors people big time, and you know this. We get in trouble when we're not expressing confidence, when we're expressing cockiness, and there's a big difference. And it's tougher when we're young too, because we want this, right? We got this. We're going to do this thing. It's like, just think it through, man, because maybe you don't just yet.
Yeah, that's very sage advice. I have a million Survivorman questions, but with limited time, I can't not talk about Bigfoot. Can we talk about Bigfoot, please?
Yeah, well, you asked for 75. That'd be another 15. We can go another 15.
Okay.
So,
Well,
and I might have to move again just to plug in my computer, but
yeah, no problem.
yeah, what do you want to know?
Well, if that's the case, I do want to touch on a couple more Survivorman related questions. So, is there a environment that you would say is the hardest that you had to endure during the show?
Yeah, again, easy answer. Uh, um, Wherever it's cold. That's
Hmm.
the answer. Wherever it's cold. When it's cold, you can't stop. When it's cold, you are always surviving constantly. You can't stop moving. You have to keep doing something when it's cold. When it's not cold, you have forgiveness time. I don't care where you put me. Just put me there when it's 70 degrees. Don't put me there when it's minus 20. And basically, how cold? Kind of anything below freezing. Once you dip below that freezing mode, it's still cold when it's only when you're above freezing a bit. But yeah, that's my answer. I don't need to say an ecosystem or topography type. You can put me on the side of a mountain. If it's 65 degrees, I'm good.
Yeah.
You can put me in the most comfortable place. But if it's cold, it's going to be hard.
I think it was the Argentina episode where you got hit by a snowstorm. Like their winter was rolling in. I'm curious, do you how much information do you get from a forecast? Because you mentioned that you have a satellite phone. I know obviously like the current technology for the satellite phones will give you that information. Was that the case back when you were filming as well?
That Argentinian episode, what happened there was bad online researching of mine.
Mm.
I researched, and I'm not kidding you, every photograph I saw of where I was going in Argentina for that time of year was green and grassy. And only when I got there did I hear murmuring of, oh, no, we can get snow this time of year. And I'm like, whoa, wait a second. I'm not, and again, cold being the issue. Well, we didn't get snow. We got a blizzard. And that nothing I had, like it was getting to the point where everything was just kind of shutting down. And I was running out of my ability to even make a show. So remember I said earlier, 50% of the time I'm surviving, and 50% of the time I'm filmmaking, and they volley for my attention. Well, in Argentina, if this is surviving and this is filmmaking, it went like this. It's just like all of a sudden I was doing no filmmaking. It was just all about, I got to survive my way through this. And I was trapped in that little gaucho's hut. So that's what happened in Argentina. And it wasn't that I was cocky. I was a little careless in my research. I didn't dig deep enough.
Yeah, I remember, I think you ate beef fat that had to have been how many number of years old? How did you know that? Yeah, how did you know that? Because I would never think to eat any kind of meat that is less than a week old in my refrigerator. How do you know that beef fat is safe? And like, was that something that you were prepared to do, or was that you were caught off guard by that and that was just pure improv?
Well, it was pure improv totally caught off guard. It just was what it was, and I mean, as you've seen from watching Survivor Man, as much as everything I ever do can be pure improv on the spot, it should be. That's what I'm there to do. I'll tangent a bit and say that's one of the joys of Survivor Man in terms of teaching skills. Were if I found a skill that I wasn't good at or had never done before, I wouldn't learn how to do that before my episode because I wanted you to see me doing it for the first time like anybody else who would have to survive would do. Now, if I come on and I'm the king of that skill, now I'm just showing off. And there were skills I could show off with for sure, but lots of like a firebow or flint and steel or something like that. But I'd never started a fire with a bottle of water in the sun's reflection. Well, let's try it. I'm in Grenada. Let's try that one. But I'm not going to practice it and get it right. I'm going to do it on camera. And that was one I failed. That way I could show you my fails at the same time. And when you see me failing, along with seeing me succeed, and you see my eyes, the guy's really doing this for real. And we get to see you have to see what it's like to fail, or you're not getting a full story. In that episode, I was failing big time all over the place with that thing. And so that beef, that gross thing, yeah, that was just, okay, let's do this. But to answer your question a little more intelligently is to say that in the end, we have eaten rotten food throughout our entire human history. It's only the last 50 years, 60 years, we become squeamish about it. There's always been rotted food, delicacies and dishes, and some still exist like that. Like I think haggis has something to do with that. There's a horrible dish up in northern Quebec that doesn't exist anymore, where they would let the internal organs rot inside the stomach of an elk and then or caribou, I should say, and then eat it, spoon it out, rotted 2 weeks later. So we've all been able to do this. The diseases come in because this food that we might eat that's rotten has been in a truck and on a shelf and handled and wrapped in plastic. That's a lot different from an animal that is rotten out in the wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying you won't get sick or get a tummy upset, but there's not as much that will to kill you. Then it's worse if it's store-bought. Let's say, put it that way.
Yeah. And a lot of times can a fire just get rid of anything that would be potentially dangerous or
Yeah, the fire kills just like all the things. The same thing with eating raw. There's a lot of animals you can eat raw. Porcupine's one of the safest animals you can eat raw. Other animals you got to watch out for trichinosis, like raccoons. But when I've eaten raw meat in many, many, many situations out in the wilderness, and it's traditional even to do that. And then if anybody thinks no, that's insane, that's crazy, well then tell me what sushi is, right? Or steak tartare, right? Or carpaccio. That's all raw. So even that, we make it look like a delicacy in our restaurants, but in the end, it's just raw flesh.
Yeah. You mentioned that failing is part of the show. I could imagine like early on when maybe your reputation wasn't as big as what it was toward the end of the series. I'm curious, were you ever battling your own ego in terms of not wanting to fail during the show? Because like obviously you had all this fanfare and you've survived all these very intense environments. Was the desire to avoid those failures more intense as the season went on or as the show went on?
Absolutely not. And I'll tell you why before I come across as virtuous. The reason is, first of all, as my life as a musician, I'm a performer anyway. My ego's intact. My ego was always intact. It didn't need the boost of this or that. I have a strong ego, and I love performing. I love the stage. I love presentation. But I'm a passionate wilderness instructor. 15 years as a guide, just guiding, no money, making no money, just being a guide. So I held honor in the skills I wanted to teach and survive. There was temptation to do different things with Survivorman, but in the end, I never succumbed. So all of the years, like the last Survivorman episode is not much different from the first Survivorman episode, almost 20 years later, because in the end, all I'm really doing is I'm teaching these skills and I honor these skills. And anyway, it's just the mere fact that I'm on TV and then I do these things and the ego stroking's there anyway. I just didn't need to create or change anything to stroke my ego, and anyway, also, even in failing, was it what made people, go, the guy is for real. And there's my ego boost. So no, it just wasn't necessary. My ego doesn't require it. My security doesn't doesn't require that I needed to manipulate my own creativity to get a bigger laugh or a bigger clap or a bigger check. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm. That makes sense. Les, thank you so much for your time. This has been a ton of fun. I knew it would be, and it didn't disappoint. Everyone listening, please go buy the book, listen to or watch the new show, listen to the podcast, etc. But again, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure.